Hello, and welcome to More Intelligent Tomorrow, a wide-ranging exploration of the potential impact of AI on the world around us, as envisioned by the future heroes of the human and machine intelligence revolution. How can law enforcement benefit from a culture of curiosity? We'll discuss this and more with Amy Grubb on today's episode. And now, your host, Ben Taylor.
Amy, I'm excited to have you on the podcast.
Ben, before I jump into that conversation, I just want to point out that I'm here as myself today, and that might sound a little weird, but I'm not necessarily representative of the FBI, although I do work for the FBI, so any opinion that I'm expressing or thought that I'm expressing is my thought, may or may not have been shaped by my experience at the FBI, but it is definitely not the FBI's official position.
Thanks, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Amy. Is that something that's true of the profession for maybe some of the people that have risen in the ranks? What is it about them that is so exciting? Is it their passion, their obsession? I feel like there's a common thread there. What is it about these people that really makes them fascinating?
The ones that I find most fascinating are the ones who are willing to share what they've already done. Like, they don't have to be the poobah of testing or the poobah of whatever. They're like excited to have the conversation with you about what did you think about that? And they're willing to hear, like, I didn't really agree with that, or whatever the case may be. Like, those people who've risen very far in IO, I really am attracted to that. There are some people who are there a little bit for their own celebrity. I love them too, but for different reasons. We need a little bit of that in our field, I think. And then there's some people who people don't really know super well, but I think are major diamonds. And those are the ones that I also really like talking to. And then there's some people that I just purposely avoid because they're just, no. I mean, every profession has them, but sometimes I'm like, oh, really, this person again? Like, nobody, like, I know that they have a name and they have done some really great work, but there are other humans out there who have also done some really great work. And it might be great to hear another voice too as well. So I think the people who give other people voices, those are the ones I'm super interested in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this kind of bleeds over into speaking. So I feel like you're a really good speaker. And for people that become good speakers, some of them learn through trial and error, but there's also this art of storytelling. Is that something you've been exposed to or you've thought about more? How do you tell a story worth listening to? And that can be, any good speaker can leverage that insight of storytelling, which is fascinating to me. I was just curious if that's something you've thought about as you've developed as a speaker.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, I think there's two sides to that. One is, I mean, I can give you a recitation about any one of the psychological principles from IO psychology, and it'll be accurate and it'll be great, but it'll be as boring as anything. And my job is to communicate it to you in such a way that you actually want to do it. You actually want to engage in it, or you actually want to understand it. And so making it engaging is really important. And stories touch people's souls. Like, I can touch your mind with anything. Anybody can be intellectually curious about it, but it's that passion that like drives people forward and want to do something with it and make it better. And so to me, there's nothing like a good story because it makes it something complex really simple. And I think there's another side to that. And that's also like, what do you want your story to be? What do you want people to say about you? And when they tell the story of Ben Taylor, when they tell the story of Amy Grubb, what do you want them to say? And then act that way. And that's really what culture is that collective agreement of, we want people to say this about us. And therefore we need to do these different things. So that's the story that people tell. I'm fascinated with storytelling. I mean, it's how we've passed down knowledge and values throughout time immemorial. It soothes people. You have kids. I have 5 kids. The best thing that you could have done when they were younger is sit down and read them a story, especially one that they've heard before. And then you put a funny little twist on it and it gets them to think about it again. It's that whole relatability and then taking it a step further. And I think that that's all anybody's really trying to do, is tell their story and get it out there in some way or another. I'm fascinated with a lot of the literature and places where storytelling is going.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
I love it because it's not something they really teach us in college or they have as like a core part of your curriculum. But then you learn about it later and you realize this is a superpower because, just like you hit on, it's we've been doing this for thousands or tens of thousands of years, and it's part of our experience transfer.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. The challenge is that most people think they're pretty good at communicating. So when you tell people it's a communication problem, they get their dander up a little bit. But if you kind of approach it in terms of just asking a simple question of like, well, what are we actually trying to solve for? And who are we trying to solve it for? Just getting that out on a piece of paper, a metaphorical piece of paper, like it's amazing how people come at it from different angles and can, it's ideal if people can have the revelation themselves, like have that like moment of like, oh, we're saying the same thing but using different words, or oh, we're saying different things but using the same word. And just by asking some questions, you can bring that out. But most people think they're actually really good at communicating. And so if you tell people they're not really good at, they're good at communicating what they want to communicate, just nobody's listening to it. So that's their problem.
With artificial intelligence becoming kind of used in the mainstream, it's used in almost every single industry. How has that become a part of your digital transformation using AI and data science? How has that influenced you over the last 10 years?
That is a really good question. So I am going to be speaking on behalf of Amy Grubb and not the organization itself. Although I will say the organization itself, I'm super proud of us. We have we have an ethics board, and we've been really thinking about what our boundaries should be, because laws and regulations have not caught up to some of the things that we can do, and we're still trying to keep that shape of civil liberties and all of that into play as we are thinking about where things go. Um, I It kind of goes back to something I said earlier, where I'm thinking about, it's really cool that we can do a lot of these things, but I'm coming back to the meaning piece of it. So what does that mean for me as a human? What does that mean for these people as workers? What does that mean for us in terms of making things easier for people? And so while the mechanics of AI and all that kind of stuff is completely foreign to me, what I'm interested in is, how do people react to that? How do people react to like, oh wait, how do they know this about me, right? Or what do we do with it, and what do we reveal about these things? That's really important. And so for me, what I've been thinking about is, what is the impact that this has on how people interact with each other, essentially, because that's my specialty, right? I don't know how to program anything, but I know how to think about people and how they react to things. And so that's what I've been thinking about. It's not terribly sexy or interesting, but I think that we have to be thinking about the human side of how people react to all of the advances that are going on, that for many people are incredibly foreign, very scary, and feel um, like the Wild West. And how do we help people see the good that comes from it, when we have examples of it maybe not being so good, in the industry, and we have to live with that legacy and that story that's been told. So
Um, I've got a stream of questions here coming from our video team, so they can help me to feed this. So something that I think is so funny, and I think you've said this statement, so this can be Amy Grubb's opinion. This doesn't have to be the FBI's opinion. But when I was growing up, if you believed in aliens, you were a weirdo. Like, you were weird, and everyone would make fun of you. And now you have people with very impressive backgrounds, PhDs from MIT, that are publicly saying that they believe in aliens. Do you personally have a personal opinion on yes or no, maybe so, undecided? Um, I just think that's so funny.
I mean, I kind of revert back to the Calvin and Hobbes statement of alien life, that the surest sign that there is some is that they may not have contacted us yet. Like that's how smart they are. I can't imagine that we're the only beings in the universe. That's just not a real thing. I personally have not had an experience. I personally don't know anybody who has. I am not naive enough to say that therefore it doesn't exist. I don't know that I think it does, but I can't imagine that it doesn't. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. That the Air Force footage that was declassified, Lex Friedman talks about it. I think it forces you to really look at the evidence and say, I don't know what
Yeah.
to do with this. Like there's not a clean box for me to put it in.
I do a lot with aviation, and I heard about the American Airlines. Was it American Airlines? The pilot who saw something like fly over and stuff like that. And I'm like, look, if these are people who are like, man, if you can't find anybody more structured than a pilot, man, they are rigid and to the point, and I love them dearly, but because I want my pilot to do that. But like, if there's enough reports from them, like there's something. I don't know what it is, but there's something. So.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, so moving away from work, what do you do when you're not working? How do you kind of reset the mental slate? What brings you joy and happiness outside of work?
So first of all, I have 5 children, and they range in age from a senior in high school to a sixth grader. They all have tons of activities that they do. So my like me time is actually going to their sporting events or their dance recitals or like chauffeuring them around where I can kind of just like have my. I know it sounds goofy, but like that's actually where I have my inner peace. I love to cook. I'm a really good cook. Um, and I run. So those sorts of things kind of like help me reset. I love to read, and I love to read things that have nothing to do with what I do for a living. Like I like reading all kinds of stuff, just because it's kind of interesting how other people see the world. I don't have a favorite genre. I don't like science fiction. I want to because all the cool kids seem to, but I don't. I don't like it. But I continue to try it every once in a while, just to maybe it's just I didn't like that particular author or whatever. But those are sort of the things I do. Yeah, I have 5 kids. I don't have hobbies. Like that's not a thing.
The title of this podcast is called "The More Intelligent Tomorrow." What does that look like in your mind as you think about the future in the next 5 to 10 years? What is the future from a technology perspective that you hope your kids will inherit? Any technologies that you're excited about that stand out to you?
I don't know that there's a particular technology. I think what I am really excited about is how we better not don't see humans and technology as a competition or as separate forces, but rather how we balance how we use technology and people to better society and to make it a more equitable and more um, happy um, society for everyone. I think that we put restrictions on things because of our technology limitations. And then we also have restrictions on people because we see them in a certain way. And I think the more that we can see a partnership, and like sometimes something is more of a technology solution, and sometimes something is more of a people solution. If we can find a way to better balance that, I think that that's where a more intelligent tomorrow comes into play. It's not all about ones and zeros. It's about ones and zeros and their meaning to people and to society as a whole. And I think that it's easy to get uh, enamored with the cool technology things that we can do. And it's easy to be sometimes scared by it. And it's also easy to neglect the human side of it. I mean, designers always think about, like, well, how's the user going to use this? But they think about it from their point of view as opposed to who's the actual user, who's the actual typical person. And not only how do you intend for them to use this, but how can they also use this? Like, and um, and I think those are two different things. Like when you buy a kid a toy, you buy it for one reason, but then they start using it a different way. And I think it'd be, if the more we can think about all of the different ways we can use technology, that would be really cool.
Yeah. And I like that the idea of it really is us working together with it rather than complete automation or, human versus. It's
Yeah.
there is a beautiful future where it allows us to maximize our creative potential and our intelligence and not push us out of the picture. Well, Amy, thank you so much for making time. I'm glad this worked. Third try was the charm. It
Third
or
try is a charm.
Yeah, it worked. Thank you so much for your time. I know our listeners will get a lot of value out of this conversation.
Thanks, Ben, for having me. I really appreciate it.